So today's scripture, the first one, comes from Psalm 14, and it is the Laughing Bird version. Heartless, mindless scum kid themselves, that there is no God. They are corrupt and callous. The things they do would make you sick. There is not an ounce of goodness among them. The Lord scans the human race one at a time, looking for any who are still wise, for even one who still has a heart for God. But it's like looking for a needle in a haystack. They've all lost the plot. Everyone is caught up in their own perverse ways, every last one of them. Don't they know where all this will get them? They never look to the Lord for anything. They chew up God's people and spit them out. But it will soon be their turn to cringe in fear, because God sides with those who play straight. If you think you can trample the dreams of the battlers, watch out. The Lord will be there for them. We can hardly wait to hear the songs of freedom as justice marches down from God's mountain. What a day it will be when the Lord redistributes the wealth and God's people are compensated for their suffering. Our ancestors will rise up with joy. The streets will fill with singing and dancing. And our next reading is from Luke chapter 14, verse 25 through 33, and this is the New Revised Standard Version. Now, large crowds were traveling with him, and he turned and said to them, "Whoever comes to me and does not hate father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, and even life itself, cannot be my disciple. Whoever does not carry the cross and follow me cannot be my disciple. For which of you, intending to build a tower, does not first sit down and estimate the cost to see whether he has enough to complete it? Otherwise, when he has laid a foundation and is not able to finish, all who see it will begin to ridicule him, saying, 'This fellow began to build and was not able to finish.' Or what king, going out to wage war against another king, will not sit down first and consider whether he is able with 10,000 to oppose the one who comes against him with 20,000? If he cannot, then while the other is still far away, he sends a delegation and asks for the terms of peace. So therefore, none of you can become my disciple if you do not give up all your possessions." May the Lord bless us with the reading and understanding of the scriptures this morning with Jesse's help.
Oh my gosh. You know, people often ask me, well, is there any, is it hard to read this week when they want to be worship leader? And I'm like, well, there's no unusual words or hard to pronounce words in there. Is it hard to read? Yeah, this was a hard one. No cult thinks it's a cult, no matter what other people say about it. You know, if there was a registry of cults, cult leaders would not jump at the chance to sign up for it, because to them, they're the leader of a legitimate organization built around a particular set of beliefs that do not conform to most societal norms. I'm not saying the leaders don't have selfish intentions or that they aren't out to scam gullible people. I'm just saying that their recruitment literature does not say, hey, come join our cult, right? By definition, a cult is a movement led by a charismatic leader who has the talent and persuasive ability to gain followers to do their bidding. The cult that's most familiar to people who grew up in the Pacific Northwest and especially lived in Oregon were the Rajneeshis. Anybody remember the Rajneeshis? Yeah, I bet you. I'll tell you why she remembers them here. Their leader was the Bhagwan Shree Rajneesh. And he established this community in Antelope, Oregon, in Wasco County, which was the county seat in the Dalles, Oregon, where Mary grew up. And to say that the Bhagwan was persuasive was an absolute understatement. Many of his followers were college educated. In fact, there was one famously who was a professor, I think at the University of Oregon, who became a member of that organization, cult. Okay, so the question then becomes, what did the Bhagwan have to offer that he could gather educated and seemingly rational people to leave their old lives behind and commit to living communally? In the middle of nowhere, Oregon. Sorry, Mary. Here's just a few tenets of the Rajneesh movement. First of all, meditation is the central path to enlightenment. Rituals, dogma, and scripture were insufficient. His meditation techniques involved movement and breath to help people break through their mental barriers. And you're thinking, okay, nothing strange here, but I could see where it could be appealing to educated people who are seeking enlightenment beyond what rational religion or traditional religion offers. And also, followers were encouraged to question authority, even the Bhagwans, to find their own spiritual awakening. Okay. The Bhagwan also taught, number 2, that spirituality and material pleasure could coexist. He was famous for openly embracing the pursuit of wealth and luxury, not just for himself either. Unlike many cults, he encouraged his followers to build wealth for themselves, not just for him or for the cause. Okay, I see where this could be appealing, because they weren't like David Koresh's Branch Davidians in Texas or Jim Jones' People's Temple, who told their followers to give up their possessions and money so that the cult leader could live in luxury. The Bhagwan was like, no, everybody here should live it up. Okay. But you might be thinking, well, this sounds all good and fine, but I still don't know why rational people would leave their families and homes behind. I'm getting there. This third tenet might give you an insight into his followers' motives. The Rajneeshis believed in free love and openness in their sexuality. The Bhagwan argued that repression of sexuality leads to neurosis and violence. He encouraged openness, experimentation, and the acceptance of desire as a part of spiritual growth. Aha! Now things are beginning to make sense, because most cults have unconventional beliefs about sex and sexuality, but they usually just benefit the leader, right? But the Bhagwan said, nope, I'm good. You all just have at it. And I'm guessing this was the icing on the cake for potential followers who thought, all I need is an ashram and a subscription to Forbes magazine to check off these first 2 tenets. But this third one, all in, buddy, all in. But things didn't end well for the Bhagwan. He wanted power. He wanted influence. And so his plan was to take over the town of Antelope and change the name to Rajneeshpuram. But you couldn't do that without a majority vote in the county of Wasco. And as you can imagine, the people of Wasco County, they were so totally against his plan. So what the Bhagwan started doing is he started bussing in homeless people from Portland to be a part of his commune and hopefully get people to sway the election at that time. But they realized that they still wouldn't have the votes to make that happen. So, what's the next plan? Well, he went to every salad bar in the Dalles, Oregon, and sprinkled it with salmonella. Yeah. It is still considered the first and largest bioterrorism attack in the U.S. history. What a thing to be famous for, right, Mary? It didn't take long for everybody to fall apart after the Rajneeshis did that. So why do I even bring this up? Why do I bring this up? Because many people outside the Christian faith look at this scripture that poor Lori had to read, and they think, really, this sounds like a cult. In fact, people who are hostile towards the Christian faith in general use this as a proof text to suggest that Christianity is a cult. Because it seems like Jesus is saying that you can't be his disciple unless you hate your families, hate life, and are willing to carry a cross and give up your possessions. Wasn't there a show not long ago where they would do interventions for people who are in cults? I don't have Lisa here, my favorite reality TV show person, to affirm or deny that, but I seem to remember that. So consider this. The Rajneeshis, who promised all sorts of perks, lasted only 5 years, while this Jesus movement grew exponentially and is still going more or less strong after 2,000 plus years. Someone once told me that my superpower is making excuses for other people, which was not meant as a compliment. And sometimes when we run into difficult texts like this, I feel like I'm defending and making excuses for Jesus, which is why no preacher likes to pick this text when it comes up in the lectionary. But I did. And here we are. And sorry, Lori, I did it again. I found the text that's hard to read and hard to follow. So, okay, let's talk about the biggest threat to Christian faith in America. Scratch that. White Christian nationalism is the biggest threat. Let's talk about the second most pressing threat to the American Christian faith. It is not secularism. It is not the increasing number of nuns, those who identify as no religious affiliation. Nor is it the increasing number of duns, those who've just had it with the church and have left for good. The biggest threat is nominal Christianity, or otherwise known as meh Christianity. It's Christians who are non-committal and are just along for the ride. It's the Christians who choose churches based on their entertainment value rather than what the church does in the community to live out their commitment to Jesus. I was talking church with a guy at the gym, Jeremy, and he and I talked church quite a bit. But we were talking about the difference between going to church and following Jesus. And Jeremy said, if all my religion is going to change as my Sunday schedule, I'm not interested. I want something that's going to help me change the way I work, the way I treat my family, the way I spend my money, the way I treat others, and the way I use my time. And Jeremy's a millennial, okay? Everyone wants to give millennials such a grief about not going to church. But here's someone who wants to make sure that the church he goes to is worth going to because of its commitment to their mission. So, let's get back to what Jeremy said about treating his family. If you just go by verse 26 without understanding the whole context of what Luke is trying to say here, you'd think, well, then I'm supposed to hate my family. But remember the rule of studying the Bible. Don't just take one verse and go crazy with it. Any good seminary professor would say, make sure you understand the hermeneutical context. And we learned that in Sharon's class, didn't we, Max? Which is a fancy way of saying, what are the circumstances that shape the reader's interpretation. Oh dear, it sounds like the preacher's gearing up to make excuses. Not really, not really. What is clear about this passage is that Christian disciples are called to take their faith very seriously. Not sort of seriously, very seriously. Because authentic faith should impact our character, our ethics, our values. Jesus tells his followers to count the cost of discipleship. He clearly tells us that we need to be all in, or it's not worth even the effort. Now, according to Jesus, our commitment to him is more important than our possessions and even more important than our familial relationships. There is a serious cost to discipleship, but there are also incredible rewards, including a life of meaning, purpose, serving, and vitality. Yeah, but preacher, hate is such a strong word. Nathan Nettleton, the Australian minister who wrote the Laughing Bird Psalms that we often read here in church, has an interesting interpretation of the text that Lori read and about what Jesus is saying when he says, if you get serious about following me, you will be seen as a traitor to your family. You will be seen as hating your father and mother, your wife and children, brothers and sisters. Yes, you'll be seen as an enemy of life itself. Are you up for that? Because if you are serious about following me, you'll have to follow me in doing the things that are provoking people to persecute and execute me. If you're not up for that, you can't be one of my followers. So weigh it up and don't bother following me now if you haven't got what it takes to see it through to the bitter end. You can't follow me without giving up everything you have. And then he said Jesus would be going around going, hello, is anybody here? And you might think, oh my gosh, Pastor, this Nettleton guy has a black belt in making excuses for Jesus. He's better than you. And yes, it does sound like that, but let's talk about that for a bit, because like many of Jesus' teachings and parables, this text is only found in the Gospel of Luke. Mark, Matthew, John don't have anything near this, nothing like it. But you can find the phrase about hating family twice in the Gospel of Thomas, but that book didn't even make it into biblical canon. But Thomas's inclusion of that does lend some of the credibility, and perhaps Jesus did say something this harsh. Maybe he was using hyperbole. Maybe, like Nathan Nettleton suggests, someone took something Jesus said and blew it up into something that sounds harsher than it is. Either way, we can't just sweep this under the rug. Because the important point is being a disciple comes at great cost. That's the lesson right there. For the next few weeks, we're going to explore other scriptures that define what it means to be a disciple. That's our what disciples do. That's our theme for the next several weeks. They're not all going to sound as harsh as this scripture, but the scriptures that we do read will challenge us to understand that following Jesus is meant to be life-changing. Jesus calls us not just as individuals, but as a community of disciples who are all in together. So may we encourage one another. May we challenge one another and walk together into this radical commitment of Christ.